Good evening. It's Adam Fitzgerald from the Darkened Hour. And with me is a treat, Michael Santangelo. I met Mike uh, through, I think it was Chandler's Zoom meeting. So how did I come across you, Mike?
Sandra Hicks.
Oh, it was through Sandra Hicks. Um, and we basically have been stuck in contact for a year. And Mike is involved with project called Truth Action Project, 9/11 Truth Action Project. But a little bit about your background, Mike.
Well, I'm no longer affiliated with the Truth Action Project,
Well, you're
but
fine. Are you finally out of the group?
oh yeah, I've been out for a while.
So all right. I thought you had still some connection with them.
I mean, I'm helping out with some of the anniversary stuff, but that's not really a tap thing. That's just a 9/11 thing.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
But tell me, tell the people here what's your profile, what's your background.
My background is really in mental health. So take you back to high school. I went to Staten Island Technical High School, which is a science and engineering high school. And I did 3 engineering internships at the Cooper Union. I think it was mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and I don't even remember what the other one was, to be honest with you. And then I went to college, and I started studying biology, and then I transferred to psychology. I got my bachelor's in that, and then I got a master's in mental health counseling, and I began working in the mental health field. So my engineering experience based on the high school and the internships is basically equivalent to somebody who completed their first year in a bachelor's program in engineering. That's about it. I would be like starting my sophomore year. That's about it. That's as far as it goes.
Why though? But why those fields, Mike? What interests you about engineering?
It was more just because the school had a good reputation and I knew I could get into a good college. I wasn't really specifically focused on engineering. I just went there, you know. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a kid.
It was still up in the air.
Yeah, I didn't know anything.
Hey, let me ask you next, Mike. What happened? September 11th, 2001. Tell me about the day.
9/11, 2001?
Yeah, what were you doing that day?
I slept through 9/11 mostly. I woke up at maybe 11 or 11:30.
Oh, wow.
And
All right.
I was in Miami at the time. I was living in Miami on September 11th, 2001.
Really?
So yeah, and I think that day I just maybe I didn't have work that day for some reason.
Right.
So because my classes were in the evening, but I worked during the day. And for whatever reason I wasn't working that day or whatever. And I just slept in and I woke up maybe 11:30, something like that. And my friend Frank called me on the phone and said, "Hey, turn the news on." And I turned it on, obviously, and wow, I was stunned. Just totally, the towers were gone already by the time I turned the news on. And I was just totally blown away by it. And immediately I kind of thought, well, how did the buildings come down like that? I didn't know about building 7 yet, of course, but even the Twin Towers, I was like, how did they just like crumple to the ground straight through themselves in 10 seconds? Like, I thought that was really odd, but I didn't really think much beyond it. I just kind of accepted the official story that we were given. Didn't even really know what the official story really was, like most people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
What all right, so after 9/11 happened, you weren't interested in 9/11 right away, or were you?
I wasn't, except, I was really upset about it because I thought it was a religious thing, and I'm an atheist, and I don't like to see religious terror. So, I believe the whole
same thing.
This is Muslim terrorists who hate us and all that. I mean, I'm not saying Islam could not have played any kind of role in it at all. I mean, maybe that's how you get these guys to actually go through with the hijackings, is through those kind of promises, right? I mean, that's what I'm assuming. But there's a lot more to it than that, of course.
Sure. Yeah, I was the same way, Mike, because I'm atheist still. And when that happened, I was like, figures it'd be Islam, terrorists. And what did I was very naive. And unlearned about Islam itself. That's why I studied monotheism after that. But I became an anti-theist almost. So it basically, I didn't really learn anything until I found out that I went about studying wrong. And I said I would never make that mistake again and be already prejudgmental. Um, and so I just stuck with an echo chamber. So it wasn't until like around 2007 that I became interested in 9/11. When did you start becoming interested in 9/11?
So I have a friend, his name's Julian. He was my roommate in Miami for part of the time that I lived there. We're still really close friends. He's just about as close to a best friend as I've got. I got a couple of friends that are my best friends, you know. He's one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
He lives in Italy now, but at the time he was still living in the States. He literally badgered me for like 2 years to watch
Oh,
Zeitgeist, the movie, the first one.
yeah, man. Yeah.
And I mean, literally for like 2 years, I was like, yeah, I'll watch it, I'll watch it, I'll watch it, I'll watch it. And I didn't watch it. And I
Right.
finally watched it. And that wasn't the nail in the coffin, but that was my first exposure really to the idea that 9/11 wasn't what we were told. And it didn't necessarily change my mind or convince me of anything, but it got me asking some questions. I was like, whoa, what? Especially about Building 7, of course. Like,
Sure.
that's interesting. And so once I saw that, I started watching and reading other things. I think one of the first things I did was read the 9/11 Commission report, which took me forever because
Uh,
it's a hard book to read. It's like reading a dictionary almost. It's like
yeah.
it's kind of hard to get through. But I read the 9/11 Commission report. I took one look at the 10,000 plus pages of the NIST Twin Towers report and just concluded I'm never going to read that. But I read the NIST Building 7 report, which is reasonably just a few hundred pages. I read David Ray Griffin's book, The Mysterious Collapse of World Trade Center 7, the Popular Mechanics book, some of the AE stuff, some of the papers, the thermite paper, and
Right.
some of the Stephen Jones papers and Kevin Ryan and all that kind of stuff. And I watched all the essential videos from AE, especially. And I've seen all the popular ones like Loose Change and all that
Right.
too. So New
You know
Pearl
what's in?
Harbor.
You're one of the very first people I've ever met that said that they have read the 9/11 Commission report. Very few people read that book.
Yeah.
It's a very meticulous read. It's actually 16 chapters, 700 pages. How and there's a lot of stuff in there.
I think it's like 500 and something
Is it
pages.
500
I think
something?
it's like 5 something. I don't remember exactly.
But just to single out, like you are one of maybe I think 3 people I know that's read that book. I mean, that's props to you for reading it. But
Thanks.
you have a general understanding over many people in regard to what's actually in the book, because I hear so many times from people in the truth movement who basically say, "Oh, the official narrative is false." And to me, I gauge the official narrative as some of these people in just the light that there's 19 Islamic fundamentalists that hate our freedoms, hijacked 4 planes, crashed into the World Trade Center, Pentagon, Shanksville, and that's it. But
Hmm.
the official narrative is basically much more than that. And you have read the whole report. There's a lot more in there than just that. It's just a small part.
It was, to be honest, it was hard to take a lot of it in and retain it
Right.
without having read lots of other things about it. So it's kind of in
Sure.
isolation in my mind. And
Right.
there's a lot that it was a long time ago too now. That was a good 10 years ago. So
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't be
Okay.
able to be an authority and to just speak about what's in that report, but I
Right.
do remember some general things about it that were like, you know,
But you read other papers. I'm sure you read the Niels Harrod papers, Stephen Jones, and other.
yeah.
What about the findings of those papers that attracted to you and made you really start thinking about what really happened at World Trade Centers
Well,
1, 2, and
I
7?
think I think just because the hypothesis that is supported by that paper accounts for so many of the things that we saw with our own eyes. It accounts for the buildings being pulverized into nothing. It accounts for the fires that couldn't be put out. Thermite has its own oxygen source. You know, it accounts for
Mhm.
the visible explosions. You know, otherwise you have to come up with all different explanations for all this phenomena.
Sure.
Whereas if it's explosives, you got it right there. You got it covers all the bases, you know.
Now, this is an area I'm like so lacking in. Like I'm completely, when I look at a Wayne Costi paper regarding the World Trade Center, it's like reading Sanskrit. I'm like, my God, this guy's a brilliant mind. So
Well,
like,
I
it's
don't understand the most technical aspects of it any better than you
right.
do, probably. But
Oh,
if you
you're much more
but
educated in this area.
anytime you read one of these scientific papers, right, it's organized a certain way, and there's always going to be a section about methods, and that's probably the section you're really not going to understand much. That's going to be a lot of jargon and a lot of technical language and formulas and calculations and stuff like that.
Right.
But there's always going to be an abstract and a conclusion
Sure.
that explains in some kind of recognizable English to the rest of us what this paper is, what the study was, what the findings were, and what is the future research that needs to be done in that area.
Well, let me ask you, because you read the NIST report. So what
On
was
building 7, yes.
right? Or let's just stick with 7 for now.
Yeah.
You read the NIST report about building 7, but you also read uh, other papers and works of other people that refute the NIST report on 7. What was it about this report that they totally just got it wrong?
Well, if you look at the way David Ray Griffin attacks the question, he's not a structural engineer of any kind or anything like that, right? He's coming at it from the point of view of he's a philosopher of science. And he's coming at it from the point of view is, did that investigation follow the rules of science? And that's what the whole book is, really, is a demonstration of how they did not follow the rules of science. And to me, I mean, you have several studies that have been done in Building 7. There's the NIST study, and then there's like the Silverstein-Weidlinger report, and there's a couple other private ones, I think. And then there's the UAF report, Dr. Halsey,
Right.
from University of Alaska. Now, pretty much the two main ones at this point that people are talking about are the NIST report and the UAF report. Those are the conflicting two studies. And my question to anyone is, okay, we have the NIST report, which is not peer reviewed, which can't be verified scientifically because they won't release the data used to come up with the model, which doesn't resemble the collapse in its, you know, just the way it looks, which doesn't account for the free fall period. And then you have the UAF study, which is peer reviewed, which if once they did the right, simulated the correct failures, represents the collapse perfectly. It accounts for free fall perfectly. It's independent of the government. So, you know, what's the basis for believing the NIST report over the UAF report? That's my question to people.
Like there's this huge support for David Chandler in this area, because years ago, David Chandler, who became really, I think, notarized, was his question to Shyam Sundar. I'm sure you saw the video where Shyam Sundar actually takes in questions regarding his presentation. One of the questions actually came from David Chandler, in which he says, "Oh, a teacher from Colorado and whatnot asked a question," and Shyam Sundar actually admitted that at a certain point, World Trade Center 7 actually had free fall acceleration. When that happened, Chandler like basically blew up overnight, man. He was like really the face of the truth movement. And boy, did his works take off. And that was one of the very first people, because I started in about 2006 and 7. And one of the very first people I ever heard in that regards was David Chandler. Was that the same for you? Was David Chandler just like?
He was up there. Richard Gage, I think, first, and then
Richard Gage first.
David Chandler.
Yeah.
But David Chandler is particularly skilled because he was a high school physics teacher, so he
Right.
knows how to take that information and give it to you in a way that a high school student can understand it.
Right. What around, like, say, when you really start getting invested into the events of September 11, 2001, who were the primary people that really influenced you to get involved with 9/11?
Probably not anybody that I met in person, probably people like Richard, well, I have met them since in person, but at the time I hadn't. People like Richard Gage and David Chandler and Kevin Ryan and even some of the loose change guys at the time, you know. I
Right.
like a lot of people, I bought into a lot of the early theories that I no longer, you know, would support
Um,
because of things like loose change and
yeah,
other
sure.
films. Yeah.
Right. Now, right. And also around this time, what were the films that influenced you also?
Loose change was
Little
one
Loose
of them.
Change was one.
Explosive Evidence, AE.
Explosive Evidence.
The Blueprint for Truth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yep. That
Um, Press for Truth.
Press for Truth. Yeah. That's the Jersey
Uh,
Girls. Yeah.
yeah. And some of the lectures, David Ray Griffin,
Right.
some of his lectures. He's got a bunch of them, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Zeitgeist was a lot of cut and paste from those films into this, you know.
Yeah. That was way back too. That guy, I want to say, was around 2007 when they first made the first documentary. I think they made two more after that. But yeah, I remember the 9/11
Mhm.
part in Zeitgeist itself. So tell me,
And
Mike.
the other two parts of the Zeitgeist series have nothing to do with 9/11 or conspiracy theories or anything like that.
Right, it was totally like detached from the first one. I think
Yeah.
the first what attracted me to Zeitgeist was basically I was in my religious stage, so I
Hmm.
was so learning because they talked about religion in the first part. It was like
Yeah.
I
That
think it
was
was
part
four.
of
Yeah.
I read a book about that also called The Jesus Mysteries,
Oh, really?
which basically said the same kind of thing that the film said.
Right. For sure.
Dionysus, Osiris, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I don't know.
Um.
But I guess I came on the scene. I didn't see Zeitgeist until 2010 or 11, something like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't, like I told you, my friend nagged me for 2 years to watch it.
Why? Why
But
did it take? I'm interested in that. Why did it take so long for you to finally say, "Yeah, all right"?
he didn't really tell me what it was about. He just kept telling me, "You got to watch this film. It's really trippy. It'll make you think," you know. And
Right.
but he never really said what it was about. If he had told me what it was about, I probably would have watched it sooner because I was interested in those topics. I never. I was interested in the religion thing first and foremost for the same reasons you were.
Right.
Um, 9/11, I had never just really looked at the alternative theories at all. And the closest I ever came was just being in New York one year and seeing the black t-shirts, 9/11 was an inside job. And
Right.
I always thought those people were crazy because I didn't know anything about it. I was just like, oh, okay, it's some weird fringe movement or whatever. You know, I never actually took the time to ask somebody, why do you think 9/11 was an inside job and what's the evidence for it? I just dismissed it as nonsense.
And let me ask you, why were you so dismissive at first? What made you so dismissive of these people?
I guess part of it was just ignorance of to what they really believed.
Right.
Because let's be frank about it. A lot of 9/11 truthers do believe in outrageous things that,
Yeah, sure. Right.
hologram planes at the World Trade. That's probably the worst of all of them.
Yeah,
The
sure.
hologram planes at the World Trade Center. Come on, like,
Yeah.
you hear stuff like that, and it makes you go, oh, come on. That's not
Yeah, sure.
even
Right.
that's not even worth looking into. It's so ridiculous.
It's almost like it gave it like a bad rap to actual truthers
Yeah.
in regards to like the movement itself. But when was the first time when you decided to finally really integrate yourself into part of the 9/11 truth movement? And what group uh, did you start affiliating yourself with?
I guess it was A&E during the Rethink 9/11. I actually was with Richard Gage in New York City,
Oh,
walking
you
around on the street, talking to people. We went to Democracy Now. We went to a bunch of places. We talked to people on the street.
really?
Yeah. I think that was when I started actually getting involved. So what was that, 2015, I think?
Yeah, there was I think it was a little bit before that, but you're right. Wasn't that with Cynthia McKinney, I think, and William Pepper, the attorney for Sirhan Sirhan? I think he spoke it there. that's what we're talking about, right? When they rethink 9/11 came, and there was a number of speakers that were there.
I didn't go to the event, I don't think, but I was part of the street outreach
Right.
with Richard and some other people.
Yeah.
I don't recall seeing Cynthia McKinney at an event.
It might have been a different year. I'm not, I don't know what year,
Maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure what year you think 9/11 was. I thought it was 2015, but you said maybe earlier. It might have
yeah, I
been,
think
maybe it was 2013 or something like that.
it could have been.
I don't remember what year, but
Yeah,
that's the
the
first time
year.
I actually did something, I think.
Why'd you just suddenly go there?
You know, I came up, the first activist stuff I ever did was Occupy Wall Street. I was involved in that first, and that led me into also getting into the peace movement. And I was eventually the chair of the board of Peace Action of Staten Island for a little while. And being in the peace movement and then really having my eyes opened up to 9/11 is kind of like, well, most of the military action we're talking about here is all based on 9/11. If we can get the truth of 9/11,
Right.
that became the avenue to achieve the peace movement goals to me.
Sure.
And because the other part about it is, I think 9/11 is just so huge that if you, let's say you turn on the TV one day and you see some really, let's take it as outlandish as it can be. You turn on the TV and you see Dick Cheney in handcuffs for the controlled demolition of the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what that's going to do for every activist group that's trying to work on anything?
Oh,
I mean, it would be the first domino to fall. And that's why I really got involved in 9/11. I was like, if we could turn 9/11 over, we could do anything.
sure. And boy,
So,
that's a big prize right there. I mean, those are big goals and hopes to achieve that.
yeah.
But did you really feel that by becoming an activist with 9/11 out of Occupy Wall Street, that it would be similar to Occupy Wall Street, or was it more um, elaborate? Because not, as you said, 9/11 is much bigger. It's a bigger incident. It involves a lot of study in various areas, whereas Occupy Wall Street was about the greed of Wall Street and the private bankers and lobbyists and whatnot. What was the difference between the two?
Occupy Wall Street was a pretty big tent, actually, because you had a lot of different groups that kind of joined up with it, that were working on a lot of different kind of things all across the spectrum. So it was actually quite a mix of different causes, and it created this atmosphere where everybody was open to hearing other people's groups. So if you had flyers, like, you gave them out really easily. Everyone, oh yeah, give me that, let me check it out.
Sure.
You know, anything that was like that was going, DVDs, CDs, people would just take them, and
Hmm.
people were open to hearing things that maybe they wouldn't have been before, because it just created that kind of atmosphere.
Sure.
It was interesting. AE was there too.
Oh, were they part of Occupy Wall Street?
They were at least there a couple of times tabling in Zuccotti Park.
Oh wow, real that's news to me. I never knew that. Really?
Yeah. And I think the first time I met Wayne was at the World's Fair in
Wayne Costi, we're talking.
Wayne Costi.
Wayne
I
Costi.
think it was at the World's Fair in, what year was that? 2000. Shoot, I can't remember. Maybe 2012 or something like that.
Right. And he was at the World's Fair, huh?
Yeah, he had a little table there. I met Wayne that day. He had this model of the World Trade Center complex on, little, I don't know if it was plastic or whatever.
Right. And this is the first time you ever met Wayne Costi?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if he would even remember it, but
Well, it was a while back. So all right, you transferred over from Occupy Wall Street to 9/11, and you become familiarized with architects and engineers. When did you start becoming a part of Truth Action Project?
with Justice in Focus in 2016, I think that was.
Okay.
I went to the Cooper Union event. You know about the Cooper Union event?
Was that involving Bill Jacoby? want to say Barbara Honegger. Am I wrong about that? Or
it was basically where TAP was born. So it was a
okay,
conference.
okay,
It was a conference that was done at the Great Hall in Cooper Union, which is where Abraham Lincoln gave a famous speech from.
right,
Um, and that was basically like kind of the birth of the Lawyers Committee and
right.
TAP.
Yeah,
Richard Gage was there. Some people were there virtually on the screen. I think David Chandler called in.
yeah,
Bill Jacoby was there. I think William Pepper was there too.
yeah. William Pepper. Okay.
Um, David Meiswinkle.
Was Mick Harrison there too? Mick Harrison.
I don't remember if Mick was part of that, but
But you went there.
I don't remember his name, but the guy who he was like the Italian version of a Supreme Court judge.
Oh man.
You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I know you're talking
He was
about.
there too.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
I can't think of his name. Now it's gonna kill me.
that's where I met Sandra Hicks.
Oh, that's where you met Sandra Hicks. Okay.
Yeah. And then I started getting involved with TAP maybe within the year of that.
Right.
Started
And
running
that's
meetings.
so you met a lot of those people in that meeting, it seems, like all the big people that were there at the time. So you started
Yeah.
familiarizing yourself with TAP. What drew you, like what did you want to get out of TAP? What did you want?
I just wanted to contribute somehow to the truth coming out. That's all.
Um,
Really.
well, in now it was a very small group. I want to assume right off the bat. Was there
Yeah.
how many people were involved with that?
I mean, at the time when I came on board, I was probably 10 or less.
About 10, all right, 10 or less. Um, in regards to with Truth Action Project, like, all right, so that's around 2012, 2013. I'm sorry, 2016, 2016. So about 5 years later. What was it about TAP that didn't work for you? Because you just told me that you're no longer a part of TAP.
Yeah, I mean, it just came down basically to them broadening the scope beyond 9/11 in ways that I'm not comfortable with.
Right. So they strayed away from the topic itself.
Yeah, they're talking a lot about election fraud and COVID and
Yeah.
you know, I don't know if you saw there's an event coming up, an online event
Oh yeah.
from
Right. Yeah. I said
from I guess it's San Francisco 9/11 Truth,
Yeah,
and then
yep.
it's and the lawyers committee is part of it and everything.
Yeah.
And they have it's more of a COVID event than a 9/11 event. They have a picture of the Twin Towers as syringes.
Yes.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
When you showed me that, I was blown away. And Ken Jenkins basically, I think, is part of this, or he has a different venue. But he basically said that he too was inundated by members of his group that want to talk about COVID rather than 9/11 on the biggest anniversary, the 20th anniversary. So you would, I don't know, you would think they would talk about 9/11 on the biggest anniversary of all. So that made you want to disassociate from the group because you still wanted to focus on 9/11.
yeah, these are. I mean, I joined the 9/11 Truth movement. I didn't join the COVID
Right.
movement or whatever. You know, election movement.
Now, there's not, unfortunately,
Part of the
not,
problem.
yeah,
Part of the problem to me is even if those other theories are true, they may, you know, there are true as well as false conspiracy theories, but it's taken me all this time to learn what I've learned about 9/11. I'm not going to start researching COVID also.
right.
And it's a lot harder to understand something like that than it is to understand 9/11 stuff, because anybody who wants to read can read the geopolitical stuff of 9/11 and get the knowledge. Anybody who wants to read about the World Trade Center stuff, there's enough information out there that breaks it down that you can understand it at a high school physics level. You're not going to understand anything about the virus and immunology and genetics from some kind of brief talk. You're just not gonna. Like, it's different. It's a different kind of issue. So, you know, I don't think I'm going to be able to become as well versed in all these different things enough to be in a group that supports theories about all those different things. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, whereas like I just concentrate on 9/11, and I can give no opinion on COVID-19, whether it's as infectious as it is, or there's some sort of like different variations, or is there metallic substances within the cell structures. I couldn't tell you even that, but it would be, 9/11, like you said, and it's a good point, is so expansive enough that it demands all my attention there, and to just study about something else just to keep up with the group seems too demanding.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my next question for you is like, unfortunately, this is something that we suffer with. There's not many 9/11 groups. I mean, when you think about it, you have nine architects and engineers, the biggest truth group in the world. Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and then you have Truth Action Project. Now, you do have smaller groups and organizations, but they're not making an impact in viral media, so to speak. So they're not attracting a lot of people. You also have We Are Change, but they're basically just divided on certain issues and politics involved. But those three would be those three. Why just three groups? Well, what's wrong in regards to like, what is it about the truth movement that you would critique them on regards to a lack of motivation in creating bigger groups or other groups?
Well, I made this analogy before. It's an analogy to sports. And if you think about sports, think about, I'm just going to talk about men's sports right now, because I think it's different for the women's teams. But in the men's, the United States is not good in soccer. I don't think we've ever won the World Cup.
No.
I don't think we've ever even really came close to winning the World Cup, did we? In the men's,
No,
I think
we never
the
did.
women's team actually won it once, or at least once. But in the men's, we've never even come close. And you might wonder why. And the answer is probably pretty simple. In America, the best athletes don't play soccer. The best athletes play football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. And similarly, I would argue that the best activists don't join the 9/11 truth movement. They join the climate movement or the Occupy movement, or the pick any one of the big movements that's has any kind of notoriety and success.
Sure.
And that's where you're going to find all these people. In the 9/11 truth, we get a lot of people. I'm not saying there are no good activists in the 9/11 truth movement. Of course they are, but we don't have the kind of numbers that some of the other movements have.
Right.
What you get a lot of times with 9/11 is you get people who get most of their information from like Facebook and YouTube, and you get people that kind of believe in all the conspiracy theories and want to talk about all that kind of stuff. And I remember Ken Jenkins, and he's part of the truth movement. He estimated that a third of what we've come up with is nonsense.
Oh,
as a movement.
Yeah, a
You
third.
remember that?
No, I don't. Did he say that in one of our Zoom meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said that.
Yeah, he said he estimates that 1/3 of what the 9/11 truth movement has come up with is erroneous. Which is, which in the one sense is good that we have 2/3 of it is reliable, but
right.
a third is a big chunk.
Sure, it's huge.
Right, yeah, 33%.
Yeah, and wow, I don't remember that, but my God, and Ken's been around forever. Ken's been there since the start. I think that's disconcerting, to say the least. Now, you more than myself, I mean, you've seen the polar divisions in the 9/11 truth movement. You have generally the truthers and debunkers, and debunkers generally go by the official narrative. That's, they hate our freedoms, the Islamics, they hijack 4 planes. Then you have the truth movement, who basically say that, and well, and this is a problem, I think, in the truth movement. Maybe you could correct me, but there's competing groups in the truth movement that cater to, say, no planes or no hijackers, but that's a small percentage. Then you have people who basically argue with each other regarding Judy Wood, and, magic space beams and whatnot. And it seems like they're divided within that group, not so much as debunkers, but there's a problem here. So you have fringe elements within the truth movement, the debunkers who generally just stick with the official narrative, and then there's people like you, Mike. You're in the middle, you're being sandwiched in between these people, and it's overwhelming. Would that be a good analogy to use you as like someone who's overwhelmed?
Yeah, I guess that would be a good way of putting it. It also seems to be related to time. It seems like there's an old school 9/11 truth movement and a modern day 9/11 truth movement. I feel like in the beginning it was based on some kind of legit skepticism about mostly about like security failures and things like that. Like, how does this happen?
Right.
Kind of thing. It seems to me that controlled demolition of the World Trade Center is the gateway to crazy land. If you want to go that way, you don't have to go that way with it, but it's right on the cusp. It's like straddling the line between rational and crazy. You have because controlled demolition, let's face it, is probably the most out there theory in 9/11 that might actually be true.
I would say, I see you're asking my opinion. Like, I don't consider that out there because my opinion is that there was like bombs placed in the basements. Now, can I prove that? No, because I really don't I lack the understanding of like basic physics. And so I would rather admit that I'm not the person to talk to. So I deferred to like Wayne Costi and Ken Jacobs, or even you. But I wouldn't say that that's the most out there. But
I mean, no, I mean, of the ones that could actually be true, there's stuff that's more
sure.
out there.
Sure.
But can you think of anything that's more surreal than explosives in the World Trade Center that's probably true though about 9/11?
To tell you, no.
Okay, so this is the gateway. This is where we go from how did the planes not get intercepted, and how did the terrorists get funded? How did they get visas? How did they learn to fly planes? And then once you go through that controlled demolition portal, it can, if you don't go the right way, it'll lead you to CGI planes at the World Trade Center and nothing hit the Pentagon and things like that, which make the movement look really bad. And as we've talked about, interfere with our quest to get anything done legally on the legal side, right?
Sure. Now you bring up, this is a good point. I want to touch on this, that there's like two periods of the truth movement. The early period, I think you're alluding to the Jersey Widows. I believe John Gold, Paul Thompson, Kevin Fenton, the early days where they would talk about security lapses. And I said, this is the perfect way to go. And also, they were the reason why they created 9/11 Commission in the first place.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't answer most of their questions anyway, but still, huge improvements.
Well, Henry Kissinger was the original executive director, and then they said, "Hey, do you have any clients called Bin Laden, maybe?" And he stepped down after that. But then they gave them Philip Zelikow, who wasn't much better anyway.
I know, he was just like, "All right, this is the next person." But Mike, let me ask you, what happened to that movement in the beginning to where now it's saturated with the most fringe elements? What happened?
Maybe it's the accessibility of all that fringe information. It's so out there on social media and YouTube and Facebook and everything that it's so easy to come across and to watch a video like that instead of learning something about physics.
Sure. But I mean, this is something that I talk about a lot in regards to the truth movement, in that in order to save what's left of the truth movement, they need to get rid of the fanatic elements that are part of even their board memberships. What would be a way to reinvigorate the truth movement? What would your goal would be to reinvigorate the truth movement or save it?
I don't know if we can, but if we want to try, maybe a new approach is in order. We've been doing the Building 7 thing for a really long time, and I think that's probably a good way to approach a lot of people, but I think we probably already approached everybody with that by this point. Maybe I think maybe a focus on the Saudi connection initially might be a good way to go, because people care about that for one thing, and
Sure.
they know about it. People, it's pretty widely known that Saudi Arabia probably financed some of the hijackers. I mean, it was in the 28 pages, and supposedly it's in some of these other documents that Joe Biden is going to release
Yes.
soon,
Yeah.
right? So, and I think, what is it, 16 of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia?
16 and 19.
And people, and people nowadays, enough people know that we're very cozy with the Saudis, and that
Yes.
they have, when we sell them weapons and
Right.
etc. And we fund things like their war against Yemen,
Yes. Yes.
which is a human rights catastrophe.
Yeah. The biggest in the world right now. Right?
Yeah, it's one, yeah. So, I mean, I think back to when they had that exhibit in New York City, in downtown New York City, a couple of years ago. There was an exhibit where they had different statues of figures from other countries, so kings and
Right.
presidents, and not all, I don't think they were all political leaders, but they were just important people from different, and I don't remember who it was, but one of them had a Saudi, like, crown prince, or
Oh, really?
maybe it was the king of Saudi Arabia or something, and it
Okay.
was, and the Saudi statue was right next to the World Trade Center.
Oh,
and
wow. Really?
and people got mad, and they got it removed. They got that statue removed because people knew that Saudi Arabia had a hand in 9/11.
Sure.
And obviously people aren't so happy about that, because they know now that we have a incredibly cozy relationship with that country. So,
Yeah. Right.
I
It
think
go.
approaching it with people from an angle like that could be more productive, maybe, than talking about, and it won't lead you, if you start with that, it doesn't lead as well to CGI planes as
Right.
controlled
Right.
demolition does.
Right. But when you go down that road of like CGI and no planes, you eliminate the hijackers. Now, this is a broken record for me because I've, made numerous videos about this, and it's almost like repetitive. But I want to hammer it home to the people who basically make that mistake regarding dismissing hijackers, because I know a lot of people like to blame Israel. The Israeli foreign elements that were in the country, and that's true. I mean, that's not speculative. That's for the public record. And we had 3 Israeli intelligence rings. One was a big drug ring led by Cookie Ogron. The other one was the intelligence spy ring, which was the biggest ring of all, and it was involving 250 or 300 Israelis. And then you had the moving front companies. So you had these 3 rings operating, whether they knew they were operating together or even independently of one another. And then you had the Saudis out west who were monitoring the hijackers out west, and the Israelis out east. But, and this is what I try to point to, there's no hijackers. That means all these intelligence rings that were monitoring the hijackers don't exist anymore. Why would they exist? There's no hijackers. Who are they monitoring? Nobody. And so if we go into the Saudi connection, as you say, um, how can we bring back the people who don't believe in hijackers or hijacked planes? What could you possibly say to them as a part of the truth movie yourself?
Well, let's first, can we agree that some of those people you can't get back?
Sure, sure.
Let's say
But
that let's say
how
some of them you can and some of them you can't.
okay,
Some of them are just going to be like,
they
they won't
don't
be
right.
reasonable about it. They're not going to listen to anything you have to say. Their mind's made up. Like, yeah, boom. But for those that you can get to, how do we do it? I mean, if somebody's going to change their mind, then it's because they're willing to consider new evidence. So you got to be able to expose them to the different arguments that are out there. So, for example, no plane at the Pentagon, if they're basing that on loose change and the new Pearl Harbor and Terry Mason and whatever else, then you got to show them the Pentagon plane puzzle and Wayne and Ken's work,
Right.
David Chandler's work. And it's good that it comes from the truth side too, because if Popular Mechanics made the exact same
Right,
video,
yeah, good point.
people wouldn't
Point,
believe it. They
right.
would say, no, it's Popular Mechanics. And
Yeah, great point. But but let's touch on that too. Wayne Costy's 5-hour presentation of the Pentagon is the best, I think, work I've ever seen regarding physics or geopolitics. I laud that presentation. The amount of hours, and I basically, what he says, it was like over a half a year of work. And it was a presentation to the 9/11 consensus panel
okay.
that worked. So anyway, my question, and you're well aware of this, is that when Wayne Costy presented this, it was like the hammer came down on him, and the hammer came from no hijackers, no planers, from the truth movement. So basically, here's a respected, lauded a person of science, Wayne Costy, and David Chandler, the face of the truth movement, I think, at one point. Here they are, basically showing you through their own scientific method work about a plane hit the Pentagon, and this fringe element of the truth movement mercilessly attacks them well over a decade. So like when you say it's good that they came out of the truth movement, but there was a price to pay. What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, if it came from Popular Mechanics, nobody would have even considered it.
Right, nobody
Probably
would
it would have
consider,
just
right,
been like,
exactly. I
whatever.
agree.
It would have been a bunch of people walking around saying, yeah, the Popular Mechanics did this bullshit video, and have you seen the video?
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's what it would have been.
yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Yeah, I don't even think debunkers would have seen it. So they probably would just say, whatever. But it seems like Chandler and Costy did pay a price for producing that.
Yeah.
Was it a price worth mentioning though? Like, but at the same time, if they didn't do that presentation, how many people, because they had to affect a lot of people with it. I guess my question is this: was it worth it? Would you have done it?
I think it's definitely worth it,
Yeah, it was
because
definitely.
if we don't wake to the truth, we're not a truth movement. And if we're
Great
just
point.
going to bury ourselves in the sand and continue to believe things that were said in 2004
Mm,
that have been debunked, then what are we doing? Like,
sure.
yeah, I think it was worth it for sure.
Yeah. So at this point, where do you see 9/11 truth? We're almost a week away, directly a week away to the day, to the 20th anniversary. Are you satisfied for where the truth movement is now, or do you think they could do more?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out that the 20th anniversary is a completely arbitrary. Um, we're assigning arbitrary significance to the 20th anniversary. What's the difference between the 19th and the 20th and the
Good point.
21st?
That's a good
You know,
point, actually, when you think about it. I
it's
never
kind of
thought of that.
arbitrary, you know. It's,
Yeah,
but I recognize that people notice that kind of thing, so there'll be a lot of eyes on
sure.
New York City this year, and obviously the other sites. The truth movement, I think, at some point had to have been infiltrated by COINTELPRO type.
Mhm.
I don't think they're doing that now, because I just think the movement's insignificant now, so they wouldn't really waste their time. But at some point, it probably was infiltrated, and I think that's where you got a lot of these theories came from and took root.
Sure.
It's but I don't want to be all black and white and say either the truth movement is just a total failure and it's done nothing, or that it's great and it's somewhere in between. And so let's think about some of the things we've achieved.
Sure.
We've gotten most of them have to do with AE, I think, really.
Yeah, I agree.
But with AE, we've gotten some really good explanations about the destruction of the 3 buildings. We ended up with a peer-reviewed paper on thermite. We ended up with a peer-reviewed finite element analysis on World Trade Center 7 at University of Alaska.
Mm,
The message has been spread all over the place. There's not a lot of people that have heard about Building 7, which is good.
sure.
What have we not done? Sorry, more that we've achieved. At least the lawyers committee filed their grand jury petition. I agree with their lawsuit against NIST and against the FBI. So we'll see where that goes.
That's the anthrax attacks. I think that's still open in Washington, D.C.
I wasn't referring to the anthrax attacks, but that too. That's another thing they're doing. The lawsuit about against the FBI is involving the oh, what do they call it? I don't remember what it's called, but it was basically like it was supposed to be a 9/11 like review commission in 2015.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I forgot all about this. I think I
You know what
read
I'm
this
talking
on
about?
yeah. That's right.
So yeah, so I don't remember exactly what it was called, but I'll call it the 9/11 recommission. I don't
Right,
think that's what
right.
it was called, but
No.
there was a recommission in 2015 that was supposed to examine evidence that the FBI knew about that was never investigated by the 9/11 commission.
Right.
And we know that they knew about the controlled demolition evidence because AE sent them a DVD and they responded to it and said, you present a really interesting argument here. And but they never, what happened was they just ended up rubber stamping the 9/11 commission. They didn't look at any of the things they were supposed to look at in that review commission. So the suit against the FBI is to get them to comply with that mandate and investigate the pieces of 9/11 that weren't investigated by the FBI, but that the FBI knew about.
Right.
Explosives in the World Trade Center is one of those things. I think there are other things too involving that.
In fact, Mike, you are absolutely correct. In 2014, I just want to look it up. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was when they called the committee the 9/11 Review Commission.
Okay.
And it was the first day of it being up and running was March 26, 2014.
Okay.
Right. So that's what they were referring to. But yeah, and it seems like at the current moment, would you be totally satisfied with the truth movement's successes up until this point, or do you want to see more?
Definitely. Well, we need to see more. I mean, come
Yeah,
on, we
sure,
haven't had anybody being held responsible yet.
Right, I agree.
Even if you believe the official story, I mean, almost nobody even got fired for what happened, for all the failures that occurred on 9/11. And if anything, a lot of them were promoted or given extensions to their jobs and things like that.
There was actually one person that was fired.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, it's actually one. He wasn't working for the White House or the State Department intelligence agencies. And I'll tell you his name. His name is Frank Argenbright, and he is the manager of Argenbright Security, which ran security at Dulles at Newark Airport and at Logan, I think. And he got fired for lapse of security because the hijackers came through there. Yeah, he's the
Didn't
only
the
one.
hijackers set off metal detectors and they were screened extra and they were still allowed to board the planes?
Yes, there was some. Now this is regarding Logan Airport. So there was basically some that got they went through the screening metal detector, and so when they went through it, some like the alarm went off, and they had box cutters on them. But at that time, box cutters were actually allowed on planes. The only thing that wasn't allowed on planes was knives over 4 fingers. So they didn't allow that. But
Whose fingers, you know?
I know, right? What's the difference? Who cares, right?
Use my son's fingers. He's 8 months old.
Right, right. So it's a bad comparison. But meanwhile, they found knives on the planes anyway, whether it's put there the night before by the baggage handlers or the people working on the planes the night before. They prepped them. And that was something that Joe Trento, who wrote the book Unsafe at Any Altitude, wrote about. That's a great book, by the way. So I would plug that book here. But yeah, I mean, we have so much still to go, Mike, and so much more that could be achieved. What is your outlook in achieving these goals? Like, for example, I always hear, and I know you do it too, we need a new investigation. What's your outlook for a new investigation? Will there ever be one now, lifetime?
I mean, the 9/11 Truth Movement is a new investigation. AE is a new investigation. UAF is a new investigation. It's less the truth that we're looking for at this point and more the justice. We don't have the whole complete truth. There's still things we don't know,
Right.
but we know a lot. about what happened. And we know a lot of things that differ from the official story that are true.
Sure.
But we haven't had justice. No one's been brought to account for the things that happened that day and since.
Do you think we'll ever hold anybody accountable in our lifetime?
Not really.
Ah, you'd like to see it though. I mean, yeah, me and you both.
Yeah,
You talk about the scenario of Dick Cheney being let out in handcuffs. That would be great.
yeah.
Are you going, by the way, are you going to be at Ground Zero this year, the 20th
No,
anniversary?
not at Ground Zero. I'll be in Manhattan, but
You'll be a Madden?
I don't believe in 9/11 truth at Ground Zero on 9/11. I think that when people are at Ground Zero on September 11th, they're really there to mourn, usually somebody they know
Right.
that died or just the event in general. I don't think they want to be lectured about nanothermite in the Twin Towers. So I tend to stay away from Ground Zero if it's the 9/11 truth thing on the 11th.
Oh,
That's just me.
you're the first person I've ever heard say that. Well, Mike, that's interesting. What and I almost like, I think that's right because when I said when I was going to go, I know there's going to be some people there I disagree with, but I said I would never argue with them because I feel that in doing so, you basically like almost disrespect the sanctity of Ground Zero, which I feel that's one area. For example, 2 years ago, I went to Ground Zero, and that was the first time I went there since 1998. I haven't been, yeah, because I was in Las Vegas for 12 years. When I went there, I started videotaping around and I interviewed one woman who lost her brother. And then when I turned around, there was this other woman and she was crying. And I had the video and I was like, I'm not videotaping her. And I'm not doing that. I feel like a ghoul. So I basically turned off my phone. I turned around. I said, "Oh, is everything all right?" And she says, "Yeah, my father died here." And I didn't even know her. I just gave her a hug, and I said, "Your father isn't dead." I said, "He lives in you," and stuff like that. And I said, I could have tried to, force myself to interview her, but boy, would that have been a low blow. So is that what you're saying about with truthers that go there and scream about like, well, nanothermite? You don't agree with that, huh?
No, I don't agree with that. I think Ground Zero on the 11th is a mourning site. It's a burial ground. It's a, you could say it's like a shrine or something. It's there. People that are there to mourn, and I don't think they want to listen to bombs in the World Trade Center. They just want to pay their
Mhm.
respects. And yeah, I don't agree with doing that on the 11th. I think that's kind of, it's in poor taste
It's
to
in
me.
poor taste. But
Yeah.
yet, you have to play devil's advocate, Mike. It's like that where they're being set up is like 2 blocks away from
Huh?
Ground Zero. Where there's like the truth is where like Gene Laratonda that goes there. I think Mike Sullivan goes there. This year, I think Sanders going there. He said, and Julia and all them. But they're going to be like 2 blocks away from Ground Zero, because when I went there 2 years ago, there was this block. It was cordoned off by the police and stuff, so there was no cars going through. So there's one block, and it was exactly 2 blocks away from Ground Zero itself. So it's almost like they're not at Ground Zero, but they're near it. So would that be any different? I mean, or you still
Yeah, it's a little different if you're not actually at Ground Zero.
right, right. They're not at Ground Zero. I forgot the name of the street too, but it's like there's
Vesey, Vesey Street.
is it Vesey Street? I don't know.
I think it's Vesey Street.
You know New York better than me, so I haven't been there in a long time. But yeah, they would. And by the way, it's just like where they are. There's just like a huge like wall, and like Gene, he's like so dedicated. He's like an activist, most dedicated activist. He has like 12 or like 15 signs, and he's basically out there and he's like talking to people. He doesn't yell, so he basically like gives a conversation, stuff like that. But then you have other people holding signs, they're screaming. The only time I ever saw like somebody arguing was with, I don't know, the guy. It was like a middle-aged guy. He had a sign, and there was like this little crowd around him of 20 people. And the guy he was arguing with was basically in a suit and a tie, and he's like arguing about the World Trade Center. I couldn't tell you the details, but like arguing, I'm like, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah.
right? That's not the way to do it. What would be a better way, Mike, to get hold the attention of the public?
Not a ground zero on 9/11. Just continue with other forms of outreach, and
Sure.
that's all you're doing by doing that on the 11th is making us look bad. And most of the people, if you hand them anything, they're not going to read it. If you
Right.
direct them to a website, they're not going to go to it. It's
Sure.
they're gonna be turned off.
Yeah. So you basically just think that they're going to be turned off by the whole um, arguments, screaming in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
Mike, what about you now? All right, so it's 2021. You're not with any truth organization right now. Do you see yourself gravitating back into activism for 9/11? Or what's your future from here on?
I don't know. I got to figure that out.
Still up in the air?
Yeah.
Um, is it basically because of lack of action by the truth movement?
It's not just the truth movement. It's like all the movements, I mean,
Really?
there's a lot of great people doing a lot of great work, but it just takes so much time and effort and pushing and pushing to achieve the smallest goals. It gets very frustrating.
Sure.
I mean, think of like even the 8-hour workday. It took people decades to achieve that.
Yeah.
And I get impatient sometimes. And
Yeah.
it's 20 years after the fact now. Let's go. Like, come on.
So you basically, you're like me. 20 years, I wanted a lot more than this.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mike, I'll end it here. And it was a great discussion talking this with you. And thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it.
Sure.